All right, time to go teach. Hello and welcome to this episode of Tutors, continuing our unit on ecology and our lesson set on the nutrient cycles. This is part 4 of our 4-part series. So we're finishing our series on the nutrient cycles. And today it is describing the phosphorus cycle. What takes place in the phosphorus cycle. And then we're going to identify the differences in each cycle. And lastly, we are going to review which biomacromolecules use which nutrients. So let's get started. And in this lesson, we are on the phosphorus cycle. We have done the water cycle in our first episode, the carbon in our second episode, and the nitrogen cycle in our third episode. So now we are going to go over the phosphorus cycle. So in the phosphorus cycle, the way that it would work is that first off, phosphorus does not have an atmospheric component. It's not like water which evaporates into the atmosphere and then condenses up in the atmosphere. It's not like the carbon cycle where carbon is going to be as CO2 up in the atmosphere, or like how nitrogen is also nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. There is no atmospheric component to the phosphorus cycle. It starts off in the rocks. And as the rain comes down and weathers those rocks, as it breaks down those rocks and erodes those rocks, phosphorus is going to then travel by the water, and it will be carried either into a lake or a pond or into the ocean, or it's going to go into an underground phosphorus reserve in the soil. Those are the different locations that phosphorus will go based upon it being carried by the water. It will either end up as sediment at the bottom of a water system, or it's going to end up in the soil. From the soil, the plants will take that phosphate up through their roots, and then they will use that phosphorus. Animals will ingest the plants and be able to then also gain the phosphorus from the plants. And through waste, they will release that phosphorus back into the soil. And through groundwater, that phosphate will also end up going back into our water system and ending up as sediment, only to go through a very slow process of upwelling where our phosphorus will end up being raised back up to where it can be weathered again by rain. The phosphorus cycle is a very slow cycle. The phosphorus that is in the sediment, it takes it an extremely long time to end up through upwelling to then get weathered again and carried down into the phosphate reserve. It's a very slow cycle. And one of the reasons it's a very slow cycle is because it has no atmospheric stage. It does not get carried anywhere in the atmosphere. It only moves through rock, and rock moves very slowly. So when we're looking at all of these, water, remember that it didn't require any organisms for the water cycle to actually occur. Now, organisms can be involved in the water cycle, but they are not required for the water cycle to occur. The carbon cycle, it required producers. If you didn't have producers to take that carbon from the atmosphere, then you would not be able to actually have the carbon cycle. So producers are required for the carbon cycle to occur. The nitrogen cycle, it required those very specific bacteria, either the nitrifying bacteria or the denitrifying bacteria, and also the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. All of those bacteria were involved in allowing for the nitrogen to be taken out of the atmosphere, but also for the nitrogen to be returned back to the atmosphere. And the phosphorus cycle, it has no atmospheric stage. It does not actually have at any point in time a stage where it is going to be up in the atmosphere around us like the other 3 cycles. Also, it would go through that process of weathering, sediment, and upwelling without any interaction with an organism at all. And what biomacromolecules use these different nutrients? Well, they all use water, not only through just the fact that every single one of them is going to contain hydrogen and oxygen, but also because they are built using dehydration synthesis and they are broken down using hydrolysis. So water is going to be extremely important for all of these different biomacromolecules, the formation and also the digestion of them. Carbon, well, it's also going to be in every single one of them. All of our biomacromolecules are based on the element carbon. And so the carbon cycle is extremely important as well for that. Nitrogen, that is going to be used in our proteins and also in our nucleic acids. The proteins, their monomer is the amino acid, and they happen to have that amine group which has nitrogen in it. And our nucleic acids, they are all formed with different nitrogenous bases. So nitrogen is extremely important for those two biomacromolecules. And for phosphorus, well, that is only going to be used by our nucleic acids and a very specific type of lipid, which is going to be your phospholipid. And so that is where all of these different nutrients are going to be used. So in summary, we have these cycles. All of these nutrients cycle through the biosphere. They are going to have different phases of their existence, and that existence goes on and on and on in a cycle. Phosphorus is the only one that did not have an atmospheric state. It did not have a gaseous state at all, and that's why it was a really slow cycle. But for all of our nutrients, we require them because we need to build our biomacromolecules. All of life needs to build those specific types of biomacromolecules, whether it's a lipid or a carbohydrate or a protein or a nucleic acid. Those are crucial for all life, and that's why these nutrient cycles are so important to life. And that concludes set of lessons on the nutrient cycles. So until next time, be awesome, stay awesome.